Welcome to Reading as Fundamentals webinar on reading development. A few housekeeping points before we get started. Everyone is muted for the presentation. If you have any questions, please direct them into the question box on your GoToWebinar control panel. We'll be answering as many of the questions as we can at the end during the Q&A session. Any questions we can't get to during the presentation, we'll follow up with answers in an email. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and we'll make a link with the recording available to all of you after the broadcast, as well as a copy of this presentation. We're thrilled to have you join us today. We'll be taking just a few minutes to introduce the RIF community team and share some of our resources with you before turning the time over to our presenter to focus the remainder of the time on reading development and how you can support it both at home and in the classroom. We'll save some time to take questions at the very end, as I mentioned. We want to take a brief minute to orient you to RIF's community team. Community is central to RIF's work, and we know that all of you are a part of that. In order to best meet the needs of our community partners, RIF created a dedicated team, and we're all on the call today. Our goal is to support all of you and the larger community with information, resources, and tools to drive your local literacy impact. So here, RIF is excited to share a brief overview of RIF's community portal, Literacy Network. This website supports our community partners, guiding them on implementation of RIF programs, access to RIF resources, and opportunities to engage and activate around literacy. In addition, RIF Literacy Network aims to build a greater sense of connectivity for the sites and partners within our RIF community. Literacy Network is your destination for the tools needed to be an effective local literacy champion. Whether you're a school or community partner implementing a RIF program, an individual looking to volunteer, or a local site looking for literacy tips and tools, the content you'll find here is regularly updated to ensure you have the latest resources to support reading in your local community. You can find RIF Literacy Network from our site, www.rif.org, at the top Community tab. And now, on to our presenter for the day. Erin Bailey has a master's in reading instruction and is currently a doctoral student in the Curriculum and Instruction program at the George Washington University. She currently serves as the Reading and Math Intervention and Instructional Specialist at Inspired Teaching Demonstration School in Washington, D.C. Erin joined RIF this summer for her doctoral internship. She is very passionate about helping children to read and deepening their love for reading. I'll now turn the time over to Erin.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today. Today we're going to go through the 5 pillars of reading instruction identified by the National Reading Panel in 2000. What they did was they conducted a meta-analysis and looked at all of the research on reading instruction and came up with these 5 areas: phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension, which are needed for children to develop reading. Since then, a 6th pillar has been identified as knowledge development. So by the end of this webinar today, you'll have a foundational understanding of these 6 pillars about how children learn to read. So pillar 1 is phonemic awareness. To first understand phonemic awareness, you need to understand what a phoneme is. A phoneme is the smallest unit in English spoken language. So if you look on the left, I have an image of some mouths moving. They're pronouncing phonemes. So we have at the top row, o, a, I. These are not to be confused with letter sounds, although many phonemes are represented by a single letter. Some are represented by multiple letters. These are known as graphemes. So graphemes then are the letter or the letter combination that represents the phoneme in written English. So for example, we have the sound F, and this sound can be represented by F, double F, PH, LF, GH, and even more. So broadly, there are 41 phonemes in English spoken language. However, depending on your dialect, where you are in the country, your accent, there's anywhere between 38 to 47. And I'm going to go over 43 with you today. So now that we know about phonemes and graphemes, we can start to understand phonemic awareness. This is a child's ability to focus on and manipulate phonemes in words. And this begins at a very early age, age 2 to 3, so preschool age, that's by sound identification. Mostly in preschool settings, you'll see this through songs and nursery rhymes. There's also activities that teachers or parents can do with children to manipulate phonemes, such as what is the word stick without the tick? What word do you get when you change the in the word hand into, and you would get sand? Notice here that we're not actually showing children the word. We are just speaking the words to them. That way they're only focusing on what they're hearing, and we haven't matched the grapheme with the phoneme yet. I will mention all of the book images shown in today's presentation are RIF books, and there's resources associated with them on RIF Literacy Central. So now that we know about phonemic awareness, how is this supported either in the classroom or at home? There's lots of games you can play for developing phonemic awareness, such as name games. That is changing the first sound in your name. If you have the name James, what happens if you change the J to T? You have Tames, and playing these types of naming games. You can also play What's Missing, where you present a child with multiple items. They can either be pictures of items or actual toys, and keep them in a category together, like a lion, a lollipop, and a napkin. Which one doesn't belong? And notice again, we're not focusing on what letter they begin with, just the sound. So we have o, and n. You can play these types of games, nursery rhymes and other rhyming words. Like as mentioned, nursery rhymes and songs are very popular in preschool classrooms. And this is because not only are they fun for children, they also support children in starting to hear and recognize those phonemes and words. Another thing you can do is use a mirror and watch your mouth as you're pronouncing sounds and words. You can clap out syllables. You can play a mystery word game. You can sort pictures into piles. So maybe you have groups of pictures that begin with a sound and groups of pictures that begin with b sound, and you have children sort these pictures into the correct pile. You can also do alliteration, like alliteration stories, songs, and games, thinking about ones like the big brown bear bought bigger books, Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. We're focusing on that beginning sound there, which is p, and in the bear example, b. Okay, so now we move on to phonics. Phonics refers to using letter-sound correspondence to read and spell words. So now that we know our phonemes, we're matching those graphemes with them, and we're blending out into a new word. So on the left here, I have an example, which is the word sit. Underneath it are some dots. I call those sound buttons because when you tap the button, that letter would, or letter combination would make it sound. So in this case, you would tap the S, the I, if, and the T, t. And then to blend it together, you can just tap the sound buttons as much as you need to until they blend together. So I might start it, sit, until I've blended that together. An important thing to note, particularly for families, is about sound spelling or inventive, or sometimes it's called phonetic spelling. That is that when children are beginning to write, they're not always going to spell things conventionally, but they're going to spell things based on the sound and letter correspondences that they have learned so far. So you can see on the bottom there, the example, we have from, flute, chew, and pate. I get asked all the time by beginning teachers and families, when are their children going to learn to spell correctly? They will, and they are spelling correctly for their developmental level. So just be patient, and as long as your child can read to you what they've written, then that means that they're using the phonics that they have available to them at the time. So there is a very strong relationship between phonemic awareness and phonics. Again, the National Reading Panel found that phonemic awareness and letter knowledge at the beginning of kindergarten were two of the best indicators about how a child was going to learn to read in school. So children that came into kindergarten with a very strong phonemic awareness and a very strong letter knowledge were more likely to learn to read quicker and more successfully. And why is this important? Because it can be challenging to link phonemes to graphemes because there are so many, like our example, there are so many graphemes for just that one sound. So we're actually going to take some time to go through the phonemes and their corresponding graphemes. It will be relatively quick. However, I have also created a resource which will be available to you soon that has all of the most common graphemes with their phonemes. So if you don't catch it all today, don't worry, there'll be a resource coming to you soon. Now, why it's so important to learn these sounds is because a lot of us make errors, especially beginning teachers and family members that learned phonics a long time ago. They tend to add the sound to the end of a letter. So for example, if we look at the top ones there, they would say pa, ba, and ma. Why is this a problem? Well, going back to my sit example from earlier, if I thought the sound for S was sa and the sound for T was ta, and I'm struggling with blending sounds together, I can keep reading it sa, it, ta, and I'm never going to say the word sit because I've added an extra sound to there. So this is a chart that is from Common Core website. If you go to Appendix A, you can find this chart. On the left side are the phonemes, and on the right side are the most common spellings of these phonemes. Note that they're not all of the spellings of the phoneme, but they're the most common ones. So we'll just go down the list, and you can follow along. B, m, t, d, n, k, g. That ng one is ng. So your tongue is touching the roof of your mouth. There are two sounds for th. The first one is, we call that the soft th, and the next one is like this and breathe. We call that the hard th. Then we have sh, zh, ch, j, o, y, w. Now this is another interesting one, W and WH. So WH, if you hold your hand in front of your mouth when you're pronouncing it, you should feel breath come out. So for kids, when they're learning to spell words, if they need to know whether they're going to use a W or a WH, they can just say the word and hold their hand in front of their mouth. And if they feel breath coming out, that's when you'll know to use a WH. For example, the word where, you can feel a slight breath coming out, whereas the word water, you cannot. Another thing important to note here with the W is that word queen. Some people would consider QU its own phoneme, but others would consider it a combination of the phoneme k and the phoneme w. So putting together k, w, qu. And then the bottom one is moving on. These are the phoneme and grapheme associated for the vowels. So we'll go down the list again. On the left is the phoneme. On the right is the most common spelling. And you'll notice, especially for those long vowels, there's a lot of different ways to spell long vowels. So we have E, I, A, S, A, I, O, U, Oi, Ow, R, or. And again, all of these phoneme grapheme associations, I have another presentation with all of those. So if you didn't catch them all during this that resource will be made available for you. So now we get to the tricky part about phonics, which is decodable versus non-decodable words. Decodable words, we've gone over several examples now. Those are words that you can sound out based on phonics. And there's many resources out there that have decodable readers for beginning readers. So some examples of decodable words, we have cat, flower, backpack. Those all use traditional phonics. Now the tricky thing about English is that not all words follow traditional phonics. So we call those, I like to call those anyway, oddball words, because they're words that can't be decoded phonetically based on phonic sounds that have been taught. So for example, if I tried to pronounce that first word there, I might read it as wat, I might read the other one as was, maybe I would read that word as yow, and the last word, because E typically makes I say a long I sound, I would read that as guive. But we know that those words are what, was, you, and give. So these words are kind of funny. It's okay to tell kids that these are oddball words, to look ahead in a book and find these words before you start reading so they don't get stuck on them. What you don't want to do is tell a kid to sound out a word that is not a decodable word. So ways we read words, because many years ago, if you learned reading between the 60s and the 90s, most likely you learned mostly a phonics-based approach, and you were just told over and over again to sound out words. Well, research shows there's actually several ways that we read words. It's not always just through phonics. So the first one would be phonics, where we transform the graphemes into the phoneme and then we blend them together. We usually call this blending or decoding. So even these examples, we can see that even though these are not real words, they're nonsense words, we can sound them out because we know the phoneme-grapheme association. So for that first one, I could sound it out as glip, glip, or I can sound the next one out as prog, prog. Even though these aren't real words, I can sound them out. The other way we read is analogy to known words. So, for example, if you can read the word name, then you can read the word same, because all we changed was that first letter sound. And most kids, by the beginning of school, know how to read the word name because it's at the top of every paper that they have to write their name on it. So analogies are good because you don't have to decode the whole word every time. You only have to change the new part, so maybe the beginning or the end. The other way is from memory. These we usually refer to as sight words, and those oddball words usually become sight words because we just have to memorize them since we can't decode them. And now this last way is through context, meaning we're thinking about what's going on in what we're reading, or through looking at the picture. Particularly for beginning readers, looking at the picture is key, which is why most beginning reader books have very detailed pictures for kids to build on, whereas as they become more proficient readers, then we have the chapter books that have less pictures. So for example, in this sentence below, I do not like to watch reality, and there's that word again, that nonsense word. But now I'm not going to read it as progs, I'm going to read it as progs, because I'm thinking to myself, I do not like to watch reality. What could it be? And I'm thinking somebody's using the word progs to be short for programs. So we can see how the context of the sentence really helps us to read the word, and we didn't have to rely on phonics in that case. We just needed to think about what was happening in the sentence and what we knew about the beginning of that word, the PR, and the shortening of program. So we talked a little bit about how saying sound it out over and over again to a child can become frustrating if it's not working out for them. So you can try these strategies instead of saying sound it out if a child is stuck on the word. So first of all, check if the word is an oddball word that cannot be decoded, because if it's an oddball word and it can't be decoded, sounding out isn't going to help a child in that situation. You might have to ask them to check the picture or think about what's happening in the story or in the sentence to help figure out what that word is. The other thing you can do is look for smaller known words or sounds within a longer word. So for example, if the word you're trying to read is shout, maybe the child you're reading with knows the word out. You can cover up that SH and they can feel more confident. Oh, I know, I see the word out. Now what could the first part be? We know SH together makes sh. Now put it together, sh, out. The other thing you can do for just blending a word is what I modeled earlier with the word sit, or if we look up here at the top, I have the example of flower. You can tap the sound. So there I would tap the blend full, ow, full, ow, flower, and blend it together like that. That's if there is traditional phonics. If you need to, you can stop and review letter sounds. Maybe I have full and ow, but I forgot what the ER sound makes. Then you might just need to review that with a child. Oh, that sound is so let's put it together now. And the other thing, as we talked about a little while ago, was about using context clues and pictures to help decode an unknown word. So if I look at the book on the right here, it says, Lola plants a garden, and I'm reading along the book, and I get to a sentence, and it says, Lola wants to plant a, and I'm stuck on that word, flower. Looking at the picture, maybe the picture has a flower in it, and you can prompt the child by saying, what's in the picture? Lola wants to plant a, or maybe cover up the back end of the word and just look at that full. Well, based on the sentence and what you see in the picture, what could that word be? That word is flower. The other thing you can do, if it's a longer word, is chunk it into smaller parts. We usually do this by syllable, and there you can see cat, pill, and then we can just blend it together like that. So those are just a few examples of ways you can support kids if they do need help sounding out words, figuring out words. And now we're on to pillar 3, which is fluency. Fluency is most commonly defined as rate plus accuracy plus expression. What do these mean? Sometimes kids get it in their minds that the goal of reading is to read as fast as possible. That's not the case. That's why we have fluency. It's not just how quick you're reading, it's about using the appropriate rate, reading the words accurately, and using expression. So if your child is struggling with fluency, this may look like reading something very choppy because they have to stop a lot of times. They don't know what the words are. They have to stop many times to sound them out or remember those sight words. They may be reading without expression in a monotone, or sometimes we call it a robot voice, or they might be reading too quickly. The reason why it's not good to read too quickly is because then you miss what's happening in the story. You don't have a strong comprehension. So how can we help with this? First of all, I'm going to go over with the rate, what the appropriate rate is for different grade levels. I have only pulled first grade here, and I'm just going to teach you how to read this chart, and then you can find this chart on readingrockets.org, which is also a partner with RIF. So I'll just show you how to use this chart, and then you can go look it up for whatever grade the children that you're working with or your child is in. So at the top there, you see on the left hand, it says grade and then percentile. So just in the first row, we have grade 1, percentile 90. 90th percentile means that your child would be reading better than 90% of the rest of the first graders in the United States. So based on this, if your child was reading in the 90th percentile, in the winter, he or she would be reading 97 words correct per minute. In the spring, he or she would be reading 116 words per minute. Typically, as educators, we just look at that 50th percentile, or we can call it average. And the end of the year goal for first grade then would be 60 words per minute. That's in the spring there. So again, you can look up this chart and look at whatever grade level that you're interested in. So now we get to that accuracy, or sometimes we call it automaticity. What is it? It's just reading words automatically. That means that I don't have to stop and think about what the word is. I know a lot of words and can read them without sounding out. We have two definitions here. high frequency words, which are the most commonly occurring words in the English written language, and sight words, which are words that are not decodable and must be memorized for reading. So for the high frequency words, we can see an example: the, of, and These are the three most common words in all English written language, And then sight words here, we have the, to, of. You can see a lot of overlap there. A lot of educators use high frequency words and sight words interchangeably. They are not the same. However, as you can see, many sight words are high frequency words. And in fact, most text is made up of half to 1/3 of these high frequency words, these high utility words. So how can, these are words that you need to memorize and they can't always be decoded. So how can you practice this? One resource available on Riff's Literacy Central is this sight word memory game. So you can actually type in what words you want your child to practice on this, so it's customizable, and you can click on the different words and then play a memory matching game. There's also other games available like word searches and crossword puzzles. And there's a lot of app-based games too for devices that also help with high frequency words because they can be a little bit boring to memorize sometimes. Okay. So how can you support fluency? One thing you can do when you're reading with a child is to look ahead when the characters are speaking and notice end punctuation, periods, question marks, exclamation marks, because these are going to change the tone in your voice when you're reading for different characters or your expression with different end punctuation. The other thing you can do if you're a parent or a volunteer or even an educator is to model what fluent reading looks like. The more children hear fluent reading, the more likely they are to read fluently themselves because they've heard a good example. Another thing you can do is repeated readings of an at-level book. At-level book means this is a book that a child can pick up and read on their own. They don't need a lot of support reading it. And if they read it more than one time, every time they read it, they're going to smooth out their voice a little bit more. They're going to sound more fluent reading. Another great thing is poetry, songs, and nursery rhymes. Because these have a certain flow that go with them. They're great for practicing fluency, and especially with all the rhymes or tongue twisters, those are great for fluency as well. And the other way is through choral reading a favorite book or poem. Choral reading is when you read at the same time as your child, or you have a group of children read like a poem at the same time. You can think of like a chorus. So as they're reading, and you might be reading slightly faster than them, they're matching your tone and your expression, so they're learning to read more fluently through that. So that is fluency. Pillar 4 is vocabulary. Early vocabulary knowledge can predict a student's reading comprehension in later years. That is, children that come into school with a higher vocabulary are more likely to be better readers, comprehend more, and develop a richer vocabulary as they grow. Now this is interesting. A child at age 3 has about a spoken vocabulary of 250 to 500 words. And by age 14, 15, like a freshman in high school, must have a vocabulary of 88,000 words. So that's a lot of words. Of course, they don't gain the same amount each year. When they're younger, they gain vocabulary a lot quicker than as they get older. But if you divided that out, it would be about 700 new words per year. So that's quite a lot. Okay. So when we look at vocabulary instruction in schools, they are in 3 tiers. The bottom tier is the biggest. This is our everyday words familiar to students, and these are primarily learned through conversation. So we can think of words like caterpillar, shoes, football. These are words that we use in everyday life. Tier 2 words are high utility academic vocabulary found in many content texts. They're cross-curricular terms, so we can think of words like terrifying. And then tier 3 is domain-specific academic vocabulary. We usually think of these as like science textbook words like metamorphosis. So what educators typically focus on is building those tier 2 words, because when children build a richer vocabulary, they're going to be able to read and understand more, and they're also going to be able to start adopting this rich vocabulary into their everyday speaking and into their writing. So how do we do this? First of all, particularly if you're a family member, you don't need to dumb down your language for your child. Of course, you want to talk to your child in a developmentally appropriate way, but the more words that they hear you use, the more they're going to learn through context. Another great way to support vocabulary is through reading out loud to your children. They gain exposure words this way. It's okay to stop at a word and ask your child what they think that that word means. Particularly if it's a tier 2 word, you might want to look through a book ahead of time and flag some of those tier 2 words so you can stop and ask your child what they think that that word means. It works best if you ask your child what they think it means before you just introduce a definition to them, because this helps them make it more meaningful, and it also teaches them to rely on the context of the story and the sentence to figure out words they don't know, and then when they're reading on their own and they encounter a word that they don't know, they have those strategies to use to figure out what the word means. Just a rule of thumb, it takes about 10 interactions with a new vocabulary word before a person adopts it into their working vocabulary. So if you are reading with a child and you encounter a new word and you've talked about what it means and maybe you try it out in a new sentence, maybe try using it a few times in the next couple of weeks. That way you can start building that vocabulary. And the 5th pillar is comprehension. This is a child's ability to read and to understand a text, and it's oftentimes viewed as the end goal of reading. We want to be able to read so we can comprehend or understand what the book is about. Interestingly, this has evolved with the Common Core standards to include more informational text. So if you look at this chart at the bottom, literary would refer to like storybooks, and informational text would refer to scientific reading or more like how-to manuals, informational text. In 4th grade, children should be reading half of the time literature and half of the time informational books. In 8th grade, 45% of the time literature and 55% of the time informational books. And by 12th grade, children should be reading 30% literature and 70% informational books. So you can see there's a big increase to informational books here. And the reason why that is because Common Core is focused on college and career readiness. Well, unless you're a literature major or English major, when you get to college, you will mostly be reading informational textbooks. If you enter into a career, say a more technical career, maybe like a pilot or a mechanic, you will mostly be reading informational manuals. So this is why it's evolved this way, so that children are spending more time on informational text so that they know how to do this when they get into the world after school. Again, since each child is unique, everyone's going to comprehend a text a little bit differently. We'll talk about this a little bit when we get to knowledge development. And comprehension is usually broken down into strategies we use before reading, strategies we use during reading, and strategies we use after reading. So I'm going to go through strategies before, during, after for literature, storybooks, and for informational text, because they do differ. So here's a storybook, A Chair for My Mother. Before we start reading this book, we're going to look at the cover. We're going to read who the author is, Vera B. Williams, and the illustrator. We might notice things on the cover like that it's won a Caldecott Medal and talk about that's an award for children's picture books. If there's a back blurb, we'll read that. And then we're going to do a picture walk. This means that we're just flipping through the book. We're not looking at the text yet or reading the words. We're just looking at the pictures, maybe on the first few pages, to try to make a prediction about what this book is going to be about. I can even do this just looking at the cover here. I can see, okay, the title's A Chair for My Mother. I see a girl standing. It looks like she might be knocking on a door there. She's carrying something like a messenger bag, and it looks like she might be going into a cafe. I don't see any, I see stools, I don't see any chairs, so I wonder what this book could be about. And you can ask your child, the group of kids you're reading with, to make a prediction about what they think this book's going to be about. As you're reading a storybook, there's several strategies that we can apply to basically all storybooks. We can make predictions, which we talked about. We can ask questions like who, what, when, where, why, and how. We can, at the end of reading, we can summarize important details like the characters, the setting, what was the problem, how was that problem solved. We can clarify vocabulary as we're reading, and then we can make connections. These can be text-to-self connections, where I make a personal connection between something that's happened to me and something that I read in the book. Text-to-world connections, where I make a connection, something that I've seen outside of the book, maybe on the news or in my life experience and the book. Or text-to-text, maybe the book reminds me of another book that I've read. Important to note with the questioning, these who, what, when, where questions are mostly recall questions because all you're doing is thinking about what you remember from the book. These are important, but the most important questions are those critical thinking questions, those why do you think the character did this? What makes you think that? How did the character feel when? These are going to develop more deep and critical thinking skills than just the simple recall questions. After you're reading a book, you can discuss the book with the child or the group of children you're reading to help with their comprehension, including questions like what was your favorite part and why, who was your favorite character and why. These also help children develop the skills that they need for opinion and persuasive writing. Another one, connections. Do you remember a time when? Open-ended questions are always the best because they allow the child to retell or explain their thinking in their own words. And then you can always extend a story by having children come up with an alternative ending or relate it to their experience. So a lot of the books that we have on Literacy Central have extension activities with them as well. And now we'll get into informational books. So informational books are different and they look different and we read them differently than literature or storybooks. So it's important to acknowledge this with children. You can say something like, today we're going to read an informational book and learn a lot of fun facts. You can look through and notice text features like a table of contents, diagrams, glossary, and index and talk about why these books have those things. You can also talk about the purpose because different types of informational texts have different purposes. It can teach you something new. It can be a persuasive book that tries to convince you something, or it can be a how-to book that teaches you how to do something. Another great before strategy is to look through the table of contents, think about what you're going to learn in the book, and children can even develop their own questions that they think will be answered in the book just by reading that table of contents. As you read informational books, it's important to read the whole book, including captions and diagrams, particularly with Common Core standards. The focus is not just on what children learn from the text, but also what they learn from the photographs and diagrams. Why did the author include those? What can you learn from those as well? You can also invite children to ask questions throughout the reading or make connections. Children love reading informational books, particularly if it's something that they're interested in, like a favorite animal or cars or dinosaurs, and they probably have some fun facts that they already know that they can share with you when you're reading. Another thing is to recognize text features like bold words. Bold words in informational books are typically those tier 3 vocabulary words, and you can ask children what they think the word means based on what they're reading. A lot of time bolded words will actually have the definition before or after them. If not, you can also model turning to the glossary and looking up what the word means. So we're building those how to read an informational book skills. And then after you read an informational book, you can ask questions like, what was your favorite thing you learned and why? What did you learn from the photographs or diagrams in the book? How was this different than what the text told you? How was it the same? Did the book remind you of another book you've read? And what do you think the author was trying to convince you? If it was a persuasive book, like the water one shown on the previous slide was about conserving water, what was the author trying to convince you, and how were they trying to do this? So that's reading storybooks and informational books, comprehension. And this sixth pillar, knowledge development. This knowledge development is important because it supports accuracy, fluency, and literal and inferential comprehension. There's a popular Dr. Seuss quote that's, the more you read, the more you know. Well, actually, the more you know, the easier it is for you to read, because you have a big background knowledge that you can then apply to the text. For example, on the right here, we have the book Little Melba and Her Big Trombone, which is about jazz music. If I know a lot about jazz music, or I know about trombones, when I get to that word trombone, I'm not going to need to sound out that word, because I can use the picture. I know that that's a trombone, and then I can read the word trombone. Or if I know a lot about, if there were no pictures and I know a lot about jazz music, when I see that TR word, I know in my head, oh, that probably says trombone, because I know jazz instruments, and the one that begins with the tr sound is trombone. So readers who have knowledge about content before they read make fewer errors during their oral reading, and the errors that they do make are still meaning preserving. So for example, if I make an error and I say house instead of home, although I read the word incorrectly, the meaning of the sentence is probably still the same. For informational text reading, if you have prior knowledge, it supports remembering the information, as well as you're able to focus more on the central information versus the peripheral information. You're able to hone in on that main topic. And prior knowledge also helps support making connections with the text. If I know about jazz music, I'm going to be able to connect better to this book, Little Melba and Her Big Trombone. So how do we support this knowledge development? First, you can begin by, similar to vocabulary, having rich discussions with your children, asking them to think about the why and the how, and support them making connections. You can also read a variety of books. So if I was reading the Melba book from the previous page, I might also support it by reading To Be a Drum and Ben's Trumpet, because I'm developing a more robust knowledge of music. And in addition to that, to just get out there and have more experiences, visit museums, performances, historical sites, and all these experiences give children exposure to many different types of people and places, and this builds their background knowledge in a variety of topics. So what we talked about today was phonemic awareness, that is the sounds, the smallest sounds in English spoken language, phonics, which is connecting phonemic phonemes to graphemes, fluency, that's reading with accuracy, rate, and expression, vocabulary, which there are 3 tiers of. We're focusing on the tier 2, which is those rich vocabulary words that we'll find in a variety of different texts. Comprehension, our ability to understand both storybooks and informational books, and knowledge development, that's building a background knowledge so that you can have a better and deeper understanding of the books you read. And I'm going to turn it back over to Jen to host the Q&A.
Thanks so much. So we're going to move into the Q&A portion of the presentation. If you have questions, we'd like to direct you to submit them via the question box now. And as a reminder, any of the questions that we're not able to get to today, we'll answer in a follow-up email. So we'll take a moment to see if folks have any questions they want to share in the question box now on your GoToWebinar dashboard. Okay, We've got a question here. Somebody asked, can we get a copy of the PowerPoint? And that answer is definitely. You'll get a recording of this webinar presentation along with the PowerPoint deck that went with it. So that will be shared with everyone on Monday. So if anybody else has any other questions, feel free to type them in. We'll take another moment here to see what else might trickle in. All right, we have another question. Somebody wondered, they suggested this would be a fabulous resource for the parents at their school, and do they have permission to share the PowerPoint? And we would be glad for you to. We'd love for you to share the recording, the PowerPoint, and as Erin mentioned during her presentation, there's a couple accompanying resources that will make sure that reach everyone that's registered for this, that provide some of the sounds that she demonstrated. And so you can share those out as well. We'd love for you to do so. And they also asked if you can share it on Facebook, and we would be glad for that to happen too. We really hope that this is a resource that resonates with whether you're an educator, a parent, or a volunteer. If there's any way that you can share this out or utilize it, that's wonderful. And another question we have that just came in is whether everybody here will have access to RIF's Literacy Central, and the answer is yes. Anybody can access both Literacy Central and Literacy Network, RIF's two online platforms. Again, Literacy Central is our book resource platform, and as Erin shared during her presentation, all of the books she highlighted can be found on Literacy Central with support resources. Those are supplemental activities that extend learning beyond the book with fun, engaging activities. We've got a library of thousands of titles there that we encourage everybody to search and check out and take advantage of, all for free. We also encourage you to consider registering, which you can get access to even more features from the website, but it's all free. And Literacy Network, as I shared earlier, is our community portal. Many free resources. Also encourage you to consider registering there, and you can stay up to date with our latest happenings in our community and opportunities for resources and partnership. So thank you. These are all great questions. We've got a couple more that have come in. Let's see here. If folks are interested in learning more about this topic, what are some other resources we can seek out? So we really encourage you to check out RIF's Literacy Network portal. We do intend it to be this one-stop shop where you can find all of the tools and resources and tips to drive local literacy impact. There are some great tip sheets there currently about how to be a reading mentor, how to host a book celebration event, some really great resources currently, and we are building out a new section of the website. Everybody who joined us today, we will love to notify you when that is live, and it will be full of robust resources, including how to do a read aloud for various ages, how to do a read aloud with various types of text, as Erin shared, both the storybook text and informational text. So there'll be a lot of wonderful sources there. And the other one that just comes to mind off the top of my head is our friends at Reading Rockets. It has a really great set of resources there you could check out. And let's see. Someone asked about finding the phonemes and graphophones list that was shared earlier in the PowerPoint. So we'll make sure that you have the PowerPoint, and I think Erin shared the source of that was.
Yes, so if you go to the Common Core State Standards website, that list is on Appendix A. So you should be able to scroll on to the right side under the literacy standards, and there's an Appendix A, B, and C. And I highly encourage you to look at all three of those appendices. They have some really great resources.
Thanks, Erin. Let's see. Anybody else have any other questions we can assist with? We'll give it a couple more minutes in case anybody has anything else they want to share, but these are really wonderful questions, and again, we're very happy that we were able to share this information with you today and help share out Literacy Central and Literacy Network as great resources for everyone to refer to and to consider to check out. Our content there is really regularly updated and refreshed, so hopefully it'll be a great resource for you, and we are so thankful to Erin that she did this webinar for us today. And I think for now, don't see any other questions coming in. So with that in mind, let's see. We're going to wrap this up. So thank you all for the time today. We are so glad you joined us. Please feel free to contact the RIF community team at the email address shown here, literacynetwork@rif.org, if you have any questions about today's presentation or RIF in general. Thanks so much. Have a great day.